people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. News from out of the women's super bantamweight division, where WBA champion Nazarena Romero of Argentina is set to face Mexico's own Mayeli Flores, per an Argentinian periodical, TYC. TYC Sports, TYC Play. They also happen to be a broadcaster, a major broadcaster in Argentina. And they're saying that these two are set to face each other May 10th in Orlando, Florida, which is curious to say the least because the promoter of the show isn't mentioned, and Nazarena herself primarily fights out of Argentina. Nazarena Romero sports a professional record of 14 wins with no losses, 2 draws, 8 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 16 professional bouts, one of the heavier hitters in the women's super bantamweight division. The same can be said for Mexico's own Mayeli Flores, who sports a professional record of 12 wins with 1 loss, 1 draw, 4 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 14 professional bouts. Just as dangerous, just as durable, just as come forward, and just as aggressive as the reigning champion, as Nazarena. This fight makes for fireworks. I don't know who's promoting it. I don't know who's putting it on, but it's going to be a hell of a fight if and when they do. Mayeli Flores was last in action in November of last year opposite the ring Mary Cruz Gomez Soto, who she stopped in 5 rounds in a contest scheduled for 8. Currently, Mayeli is on a 4-fight winning streak to Nazarena Romero, who's been out a little longer. She last saw action in August of last year opposite the ring Paulette Valenzuela, who she stopped in the 10th round of a contest scheduled for 10. She keeps a good schedule of activity. She fought 2 times last year and 2 times the year before that. You could definitely argue that Nazarena Romero's quality of competition is a bit better and more ambitious than Mayeli's, as she's been in there with a champion in Mayerline Rivas, a former champion in Erica Cruz. Now she is a reigning champion herself, reigning WBA champion. I like this fight, but I am a bit surprised that Matchroom has not yet reached out to Nazarena for a unification match with their prized stallion, Ellie Scottney. This division's only unified champion. I don't know. Maybe the reason that they haven't reached out to Nazarena is because they've reached out to Yamileth, this division's only other champion, the WBC champion, and the longest reigning champion at the weight. Maybe they're trying to work something out with her. Back to Nazarena. And Mayeli, what makes for an excellent fight, but also a high-risk fight. Mayeli Flores is a high-risk, low-reward. She's the kind of fighter that is cut from the same cloth as Nazarena Romero. Nazarena's a pressure fighter, and so is Mayeli. If you've seen her, she's basically a female version of Isaac Cruz. In the sense that she is a short, stocky, stumpy fighter. In the sense that she has the same base style as an Isaac Cruz. She's a mid-range to inside pressure fighter. She has to be because of her physical dimensions. She doesn't have the height or the length to be an outside fighter or a mover. She has to get inside. Nazarena Romero is the same way, but she is a little taller and a little longer, and I'd say more adaptable. More than Mayeli. You could never accuse Nazarena of being a sugarfoot fighter or a finesse fighter. She really is more of a blunt instrument. But there are moments, there have been spots where she'll take that half step back to create some space, get some punches out. There have been moments where she'll move lateral to create a bit of distance, set up counters. Moments. And I say moments because it's not often that anybody can put Nazarena Romero on the back foot. Usually, she's the one doing that to her opponents. So I anticipate that it's going to be Mayeli coming forward. Mayeli's going to be the aggressor because she has to be, and it will be Nazarena looking to move around and create some space, as to not get smothered in the pocket by Mayeli. Mayeli's best punches are her looping punches when she leans off to one side to bring the backhand over. Nazarena Romero's best punches are her bent arm punches. Her looping punches, her hooks, her and Mayeli have the same sweet spot. I think punch for punch, Nazarena Romero packs more single punching power than Mayeli Flores. She cracks a little harder. But I have seen Nazarena flustered before by a pressure fighter like herself in Erica Cruz. I have seen Nazarena rendered gun-shy at least once, so she has to be careful that that doesn't happen again with Mayeli when she's faced with a pressure fighter just like she is. We'll talk more about this fight when it's officially announced and as the fight date approaches. In men's junior middleweight news, veteran boxing scribe Marcos Villegas took to his social media to react to Keith Thurman's knockout win over Brock Jarvis. He said, "Just watch Thurman's knockout over Jarvis, my thoughts. Jarvis landed counterpunches when Thurman lunged. Expect that to be tightened up for the Tszyu fight. Maybe it was ring rust. Keith still has that pop and fast twitch power that is always going to make him a threat at 154. Overall, I just want to see him be more active. We need more personalities like Keith in the sport. The guy builds up fights. He's exciting. Tons of fights make sense next. Tszyu, Jermel Charlo, Virgil Ortiz, Errol Spence." After the fight, Keith Thurman said, "If that contract manifests, you know what Keith Thurman will do. Send the contract, I sign it, I'd be happy to make the fight happen." And that was the whole point of going to Australia. It's not simply to go fight Jock Jarvis. It's a three-pronged process where you fight Jarvis, Tszyu fights Spencer, then you guys fight each other. Marcos Villegas continued, "Thurman versus Tszyu is being planned for July of this year. A very short turnaround for Tszyu, seeing as he has a fight on April 6th against Joey Spencer, and Joey can crack. Very short time frame, and a lot of intangibles can happen there that can push the fight back." Marcos is right. I mean, if there's a cut, if Tszyu busts his hand, injures his shoulder, a lot of things can happen. And that's if he wins. If he were to lose, well, that throws the monkey wrench in the whole goddamn thing. But that's what the plan is, to put Keith Thurman in the ring with Tszyu, where some are now calling for Keith Thurman versus Errol Spence. The one that got away, the unification match that never was between two guys who were on the same side of the street when Keith was a welterweight champion and Errol was a welterweight champion. Immediately after the fight, immediately after the highlight reel knockout, I saw a lot of people online calling for a Keith Thurman versus Errol Spence Jr. fight. Is it possible? Anything can happen. Anything is possible. The real question is it probable? Is it likely? I think that all depends on how much longer it's going to take Errol to come back. We're coming up on 2 years, folks. We're coming up on 2 years since the Terrence Crawford fight. To my knowledge, he hasn't hired a trainer yet to replace Derek James. You tell yourself that, well, look at Keith. He came off a 3-year hiatus. He was gone for 3 years, and just like that, he's back. So who's to say it can't be the same way for Errol? Here's what the problem is. It's not like Keith Thurman came back to fight some killer. He came back to fight Jock Jarvis, who had already been knocked out at 140. You gotta take a closer look at this situation. They likely offered Keith very good money to go to Australia to take on a beatable guy. That's what lured him out. Good money for a beatable guy. Good money, you understand? Good money. Not great money. Nothing astronomical, but I think they likely paid Keith something in the neighborhood of maybe $2 million guaranteed to go out there and do that for a beatable guy. Good money. Now you start talking about a fight between Keith and Errol, and things become a lot more expensive. A lot more expensive with Keith. And how much money are you going to have to offer Errol to come out of retirement? Because he's basically retired. I mean, he didn't say it, not officially, but he's been gone for close to 2 years, so you tell me. And you're talking about a fight in America, not in Australia. You're talking about a fight in America where the fight will be a lot more expensive to do, where the fighters are going to want more money. So with those things in mind, how likely is it
that we get Thurman versus Spence.
Spence needs a tune-up fight, and I feel like until he gets one, it isn't really very likely at all. I know what he said, that he doesn't believe in tune-up fights, but close to 2 years removed from the sport, you need one.
Keith just had his. That's what Brock Jarvis was to Keith. A high-profile tune-up fight. High profile in Australia.
Where they build it as a pay-per-view? That's what Brock was to Keith. You gotta find somebody for Errol to fight, if Errol even still wants to fight.
Does he?
I used to favor Errol Spence Jr. to win this thing, when this fight was a hot-button topic, before it becomes about Terrence Crawford and unifying with him. In that brief moment, that brief window, where this was a conversation, this was a fight that I favored Errol to win due to his patented body attack. Remember, Errol Spence Jr. was an accomplished body puncher, where Keith Thurman doesn't seem to like it to the body.
That was then. This is now. Is it possible that Keith Thurman, because he's had all these stints of inactivity, is more well-preserved than Errol? The beating that Errol took at the hands of Terrence Crawford is a worse beating than anything Keith Thurman suffered against anyone. I mean, yeah, he lost to Manny, but he didn't get beat like Errol got beat.
So you're saying you favor Keith Thurman to win this thing now?
I'm saying that's something to think about. That while Keith Thurman has been an injury-prone fighter, sparsely active over the years, the virtue of that inactivity is he's not as war-torn as Errol Spence Jr. He's not as banged up.
Some people don't think Errol should even be fighting. Some people think the guy's on a slide, the beating was too bad, and he needs to hang him up. That's how some people feel. Where Keith, hey, he's still out here, he's still fighting, and he's winning.
The enthusiasm towards this fight that has since become cult product comes from a sense of nostalgia. The fight that never was from circa 2017 and 2018.
Revived due to the resurgence of Keith Thurman. Now they need to get Errol's career out of the intensive care unit and get him back in the ring. Does he want to be back in the ring?
I ain't heard nothing about a tentative fight date, an ETA for his return.
It's a conversation. I can admit that. Keith Thurman coming back makes this a conversation, but I don't know that it's going to be much more than that.
Yeah.
Just a conversation, something to talk about.
Jesus Christ, we're still talking about Thurman versus Spence in 2025? Better late than never, I guess.
Not really. Finally, in men's light heavyweight news, an update to a story we talked about in a previous video. I'm sure that most of you have heard by now. There are no negotiations currently in play for Dmitry Bivol versus David Benavidez. It's just fake news. Samson Lukowicz said he would like a fight between his charge, David Benavidez, and light heavyweight king, Dmitry Bivol, to be a reality, but at present, it seems far away. Lukowicz told Boxing Scene that there has been much fake news around the fight, but he said, I hope it becomes a reality because we would love that fight. Lukowicz said an offer was sent to Bivol's lawyer last Thursday. In it, the proposal says Bivol's team would choose the month of the fight, starting from September and concluding in December, and PBC would make a day available that month. Bivol, who is promoted by Matchroom, had most recently fought on Riyadh Season Bills with a bout against Malik Zanad, followed by 2 fights against Artur Beterbiev for the undisputed light heavyweight championship. Beterbiev won the first encounter by a narrow margin, but a deal was quickly done for Bivol to have a rematch, and in return, Bivol won a decision, becoming the first man to beat Artur Beterbiev. David Benavidez, who boxes with PBC, was an interested spectator sitting ringside in Saudi Arabia scouting out future opportunities.
No, he wasn't. It's widely reported that he literally left before the main event. He wasn't scouting anyone.
It is understood, however, that Riyadh Season are keen on a decider between Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol, rather than have the latter address his WBC mandatory, David Benavidez. I've sent an offer, but I've not heard back, said Lukowicz.
And this is where it devolves into a case of he said, she said, like all things do when Samson and one of his fighters is involved. He says he sent an offer. he ain't hear nothing back yet.
I've sent an offer, but I've not heard back, said Lukowicz. There's been no negotiations, just one letter. The boxing scene aren't the only people that Sampson spoke to. He also spoke to Bernardo Pilati, did a sit-down interview with him, a lengthy one, where he divulged even more.
There's talk of a David Benavidez injury. To no one's surprise, no one who subscribes to this channel and gets their intel from here,
no one will be surprised to hear that when Sampson spoke to Bernardo, he made mention of a David Benavidez injury, an injury that we hadn't heard anything about up until this point, up until this story starts doing the rounds.
We didn't hear anything about an injury immediately after the David Morrell fight. We didn't hear anything about an injury during fight week for Bivol and Benavidez. We didn't hear anything about an injury in the weeks that followed. It's only now that this story is doing the rounds, we hear about an injury.
And what did I tell you in the build-up? What did I tell you far, far ahead of time? After the Benavidez versus Bivol fight, to buy himself some time, you're going to hear something about an injury, something's going to happen, he's going to step on a Lego or get a hangnail, a paper cut, something.
He's not fighting Dmitry Bivol.
I get so tired of these situations involving American fighters or American-based fighters because, for starters, when Sampson Lukowicz says that he made Dmitry Bivol an offer, it's important to know what the offer was, the dollar amount, because you have to stake that against whatever Turkey wants to pay him for the trilogy. And if you're not offering up as much money as Turkey is...
How serious is your offer then?
It's important to note that I would actually prefer to see Bivol versus Benavidez. I say, do Bivol versus Benavidez in Saudi. Let Artur Beterbiev fight Michael Eifert on the undercard, the IBF's mandatory challenger. Let him do that while Dmitry settles this. I think he beats David Benavidez, and if he does, you can still do the trilogy in the fall, because I think Dmitry beats David and Artur steamrolls Michael Eifert.
Simple.
Nothing is ever simple when PBC fighters are involved. Being honest with you, all this talk about a letter, an offer, it's just for the optics. It's just so that people don't criticize David when he follows through with the plan. And the plan is not to box in Saudi. It's not to box Dmitry.
You don't think the offer was real?
Well, how does an outfit that only did a grand total of 5 shows last year come up with the money to pay Dmitry? From where?
You don't have Canelo anymore.
Canelo's fights made up 2 of the 5 fights that you did last year, and his fights pay for themselves. You then have the Gervonta Davis fight.
That couldn't have costed very much, because how much do you think it costs to get him in the ring with Frank Martin? That's 3.
And then you have the 2 Tszyu fights, one of which you didn't pay for, one of which wasn't on the PBC's dime. It was on No Limits.
The Murtazaliev fight.
I think about all of that and I ask myself, do these people really have the money to offer Dmitry Bivol money that would rival what Turkey's offering him?
No.
Do I really believe these guys want the fight and are willing to pay to play?
No.
Not against Turkey. Your offer, quote-unquote offer, for him to box Benavidez versus Turkey's offer for him to box Artur, you guys ain't in the same stratosphere. You'd have to break the bank to rival what Turkey's offering, and I don't think you got it. So what all of this really is a smokescreen.
It's for the optics. It's so that it looks like David isn't ducking.
And the whole hullabaloo about the fight is really just David Benavidez fans hoping they'll be vindicated. These guys are not gonna fight. This ain't gonna happen.
Period.